Hello everyone and welcome to week 7, day 3. Again, I apologize for having to cancel class on Friday, but this will work just the same. So make sure that you are submitting your mystery numbers this week for week 7. Today we're going to be talking about our last lesson that we're going to have before spring break. So this will be all of the assignments up to 3.03, except for anything that's excused, will be your expectation in order to earn that extra credit. So today you can see on the board that we're going to be talking about areas of triangles and rectangles. All right, so we have two formulas that we're going to really look at today. The first one we're going to look at is our area of our rectangle. And that one we're pretty common. That we should be pretty familiar with. That's length times width. The second one actually has two formulas with it, and that's because you're ultimately going to get the same answer, but you can do it in two different ways. So when we're talking about a triangle, you can do base times height times a half, so take a half of that, or you can do base times height divided by 2. The fact that we have times a half or we're dividing by 2 gets us the same answer, because if I do 4 times a half, well, a half of 4 is 2. Or if I do 4 divided by 2, I get 2. Either way, you can see I still end up with that same number, but it's just two different ways to do it. I do not care which way you choose to do it. I will tell you, though, this is my preference. I will do it both ways when we work through practice problems, but do know that it's just easier personally for me to divide by 2, so you'll see I probably revert to that a little bit more frequently. Again, I like to do it both ways so you can see both options though. Let's look at the rectangle first. So when we have a rectangle, we have our two dimensions. So we're talking about area, we're talking about our length, and our width. And all you have to do is multiply them. When we're talking about area, the area is the inside of this rectangle. So think about your backyard. Let's say you have a fence. Your fence is the perimeter. In this case, it would be the green line all the way around. And we talked about adding up those sides. Your area then would be the grass, or in this case of our shape, the light blue shaded area here. So you can see that there's a much greater area than there is perimeter. In order to get the area, again, all we do is multiply our width and our length. So I do 8 times 5, and I'd get 40 centimeters squared. We put that squared with our unit because it represents that we have two dimensions, our length and our width. If you look at the bottom triangle, you'll notice I'm actually given my area and I'm given my width. I want you to get familiar and comfortable with going back and forth. So if we're looking for my length, I would have to divide then. If we multiplied to get the area, we have to divide to get the length or the width. So I would do 55 divided by 5, and I would get 11 centimeters for my length. So in this case then, the x is 11 centimeters. If we are looking at a triangle, I know I explained that you could take a half of it or you could divide it by 2, and the reason why this works is this triangle, this picture at the very top here. You can see that I actually have a rectangle, and then I split it apart into two triangles. And that's because it takes, for every rectangle you take, it creates two triangles. So we find our dimensions the same way that length times the width or the base times the height. We use those words pretty interchangeably, although I'll tell you that the base and the height have a little bit more specific definition. Anyway, so because we use them interchangeably, the length and the width, it's the multiplying the same. But when we take that 1/2, we're saying, I only want one out of these two triangles. I don't want both, because both would give me this full rectangle. And I'm not talking about a rectangle. We're talking about a triangle. So you take a half of that rectangle, or because we divided it into two pieces, I could say divide it by 2. And that's where that formula really comes from. Base times height divided by 2, because we're dividing our rectangle into two triangles. Or 1/2 times the base times the height, because we're only taking a half of that dimension. So the base and the height have very specific places in a triangle. Your base is always the piece that's going to be on the bottom, the horizontal piece, and your height will always be your vertical piece here. The important part is that they form a right angle. If they do not form a right angle, we technically can't multiply those two dimensions, that height and the base. They need to form a right angle. So you can see that on the bottom two triangles, they look kind of funny because what we have is our height and our base there are a little bit different because they're outside of the triangle. Well, they have to go from the tip to the bottom, and the only way that was going to happen at a 90-degree angle in this particular triangle is if we went outside the triangle. And the same thing here. And sometimes that happens, and that's very okay. So just know that wherever it forms the 90-degree angle is where we need to calculate that height and that base. So the 5 that we have here would not work because it's not forming a 90-degree angle. You could see that this is actually an obtuse angle. So again, that causes us a problem when we're finding that area. Okay, so let's practice some problems here. We're going to look at the top teal triangle first. So we have a lot of different dimensions. We have a 12 that's on the bottom here. We have an 8, and then we have two 10s. Well, the 10s are slanted. They don't form a 90-degree angle, so we don't actually want to use them. You can see that the 8 and the 12 form that 90-degree angle. So I'm going to do 8 times 12 to get 96. And then I'm going to take half of it, or I'm going to divide by 2. So 96 divided by 2, I get 48. Or I can say 96 times 1/2, and I would get still the 48. Again, it's just choosing. Do you prefer to divide? Do you prefer to multiply? So if we include our dimensions there, it would be 48 inches squared. Again, because we're looking at that units that have that dual measure, length and width there, that base and height. All right, so I'm going to give us some room here, erase some of this. Again, I was just multiplied that base times the height. If we look down here at this triangle, I'm going to tell you now our area is 24. And I want to know what my height is. Well, from here we can see that our base is 2. So we have to work backwards. If I divided by 2 or multiplied by 1/2 in order to get my area, that means that this number only represents half of the whole thing. In order to get that whole area, I'm going to multiply it by 2 and I get 48. So if I know that the whole area of that rectangle would be 48, and I know my base is 2, in order to get 2 times 40 something to get me 48, it would have to be 2 times 24. Let's do another one using that same principle, maybe using some different numbers though. Let's say my area is 8. Oops, sorry. So my area is 8. I know my base is still 2. I don't know what my height is, but I need to figure it out. So the last thing we did when calculating the area of the triangle was multiply it by 1/2 or divide it by 2. So I'm going to multiply it by 2 in order to get the full area of that rectangle, and I'd get 16. If my base was 2, the only number times 2 to get me 16 would be 8. So again, just working backwards. The important part about working backwards in a triangle versus how simple it was when we just did our area here, when we did the 55 divided by the 5, is that first we have to multiply that step by the 2, saying that, again, that triangle only represents half that, so in order to get the full one, we multiply it by 2. All right, so let's go through some reminders here. We just went through that 3.03. I know so many of you have already finished it. Again, I was just finding that area of rectangles and triangles. Please submit your mystery numbers. Our second mystery number today, is 12. Our second mystery number today will be 12. I don't know if I said a first one. Well, if I did use the first one, if I didn't, how about we do 12 and 6? Just a reminder, I will be sending out our zeros in our schedule. Since it is a weekend, I'm not going to do it this Sunday. So I will not do it like 3 days from now, the 15th, because I want to give you as much time as possible to catch up with assignments. So I'm going to actually do it the 22nd, the day your extra credit is due. So you will see that our older schedule is set until March 22nd, which is fine. I'll give you plenty of time to catch up. In order to gain that extra credit, you have to do two things. Make sure you complete all the way up to 3.03 and then send me a K-mail and I'll put that 20 points extra credit in. I do just want to send out a reminder, obviously, since I'm not teaching tomorrow, I will be out of town. I won't have access to K-mail, so you'll just kind of have to be patient with me if you have any questions. Other than that, have a wonderful spring break. Hopefully you saw that K-mail I sent out about my expectations that you are working and getting caught up during this week. And if you are caught up, then fantastic, wonderful. I will see you all on Monday, March 23rd.